Alright guys, we got Scott Little here today on the BSR sessions, an oboe soloist. He just did a great set for us. Scott, would you mind telling us a little bit about what you just played? You were talking earlier, you mentioned it was inspired by something special.
Oh, yeah. So pieces that are for just oboe alone are kind of rare. People didn't start writing them until like later in time happened. And so both of the pieces I played were written in the 20th century, so they're kind of like newer works. And the first one I did was based on Impressionist paintings. So the first one is like this Monet. It's like a market square, but everything's these like blue hues. It's very cold, and so I think that's where some of like the minor, more aggressive feeling in that one comes from. And the second one is supposed to be, I think it's a Renoir, and it's I say as though I know. I say as though I like studied Impressionist paintings, but it's a scene in the woods, and so there's kind of like these bits of maybe an animal jumping out or like something flittering by, but then there's kind of also a lot of quiet in comparison to the other movements I played. And the last one is supposed to be a storm over the ocean. People who went to the ocean and they got rained out, and so there's this sort of like this wave feeling. It's like keep going up and down throughout the whole thing. And that's the first one. The second one is inspired by Ovid's Metamorphoses, which, as far as I know, are sort of like mythology things that were done a little bit later in time. We know they're attributable to Ovid, and so I'm not entirely sure on the history there, but each one is a character. So the first one, Pan, he's like playing on a pan flute to his lover, and the next one I did, Niobe, she is like this woman who had a bunch of kids, and the gods were mad that she was like proud that she could produce so many children, and so they turned her into something, and so she's kind of crying in that one. And then the next one is Bacchus, who I think is similar to Dionysus. He's like this party god, basically. Mm-hmm. He's just like having a grand old time, so there's like a little dance that happens, and then he's like supposed to be walking around all fat and stuff, and then there's like this kind of wild like chase scene that happens, and it's kind of all over the place. And the last one is what's her name? Arethusa, and she that one, it's Greek mythology is like dumb sometimes, you know. She swam in a lake, and the lake turned out to be a god, and so he fell in love with her, and she had to escape him, and she escaped him by becoming a lake herself. So it's like all these flowing, descending lines like water going over. And so it wasn't really until later in time that composers started writing things where they were like trying to tell a very, very specific story. I mean, that's not true. There were stories for a long period of time, but something like doing it with this, where it's just one instrument telling all these different tales, that was something that didn't really happen until later in time with classical music.
Mm-hmm. So that kind of touches on what I was about to ask you about. You know, both of those pieces, especially the Metamorphoses piece, are very narrative, you know, so, you know, speaking to these different characters and their stories, and also these rich elements of, nature tied into it. Can you just talk about your role as a storyteller nested in being a musician? Do you see yourself as a storyteller when you're playing music?
That's a great question. This is an oboe, and we don't use our vocal folds to make sound on it, but we always are talking about how like oboes are supposed to be singers. Every musician is supposed to be able to do what the human voice can do, because you can tell such a story. I mean, here I am talking to you about this stuff. It's like you have all those inflections, and so with the oboe, we think about it a lot, but sometimes I have a tendency to overthink it. I also write music, and so I overthink music a lot. I think with these pieces, every single one is so distinctly different that I just try to do what the composer put on the page very clearly and not go too far. But there's also like an element of like, I'm playing this music and it's sound, but I'm also trying to make a visual aspect of it. And so some of the things that I'm doing with my body, where like the way I take a breath, or how long I'm letting certain things sit before I start playing again, that factors in too. I mean, if I'm going to tell a story about the woods and there being like little things coming out of nowhere, I'm not just going to keep jumping into new things. It doesn't specifically say in the music like exactly how long you're supposed to wait, and so I kind of have freedom to make it a little bit more like one thing happens over here and then it kind of comes over here. But if I overthink it, then my oboe teacher here at Kent, she's always like, you gotta cut that out, kid. So it's sort of a balance back and forth.
Yeah, that's really interesting, especially as a solo musician. You know, all of the attention is on you, and those pauses and some of those things might easily seem arbitrary, but you have to work them in as part of your performance. But at the same time, you're right, you don't want to overthink it because you don't want to put too much weight on it.
Yeah.
Anything else specifically interesting you'd like to tell us about playing the oboe? You were talking earlier about the reeds. Tell us about your reeds and making your reeds.
I mean, yeah, I could talk forever about this little thing. It's like, with this instrument, it takes a basic sound and makes it more beautiful. And so, because this is like the start of what happens, it's super specific. And I play in a way, my teacher was just getting mad at me the other day, she's like, you play in a way where if you have a bad reed, you can't ever sound good. So I spent a lot of time making these little things. They're just pieces of wood, and we kind of strap them together and then scrape them so that they vibrate. But it's so specific. It's like, if that doesn't work, it's like waking up when you have a cold and you can't speak because your vocal cords are like full of mucus. If my reed feels like it's full of mucus, then that's like a problem. But I don't know exactly what I would say. I don't know what's super interesting about it. We harvest sometimes our own cane around here. This is called a rundodonax, which means African tall grass or something. It's like bamboo, and it grows anywhere where there are vineyards. And so we harvest it here, but we also buy it from Germany. And then we make these things. It's like if you could wake up each day and change your voice a little bit, then that's what this reed does. It's a lot of what you do. If you go to other countries, the way people play oboe is very different, especially in Germany, and that comes from their reed. Their reeds are like, they don't do anything for the players. The players have to like mash it with their teeth and with their lips to make it happen. But for us, we make it where it's like, if you have a good reed, it should do all these things for you. So I don't have to worry about things. And little things that go wrong here and there, I tend to blame on my reed, but I probably shouldn't.
So that's a level of, technicality and precision that most musicians don't really have to pay attention to with their instrument, probably.
Yeah.
At least not in that way. So do you think that maybe, and some of the other things you've mentioned about playing oboe, it seems like you're very precise about your style and about your preparation for it. Do you think that helps engage you more with your music, or do you think there's something unique to be said about oboe music or classical music maybe because of that?
That's a great question too, because I think it makes me like the oboe less. I like this instrument a lot. It's a great instrument, it's a great sound, and it gets to do a lot of like fun showing off kind of things when it's playing with other people, because once it's playing, you can't ignore it. It's like, it's too piercing of a sound, But it's like, if I have a musical idea, and maybe other artists who come in here think the same thing. It's like, if I have an idea and I want it to happen, I have to get rid of the things that are preventing me from doing it. And if the reed isn't good, if I haven't figured out a way to make a good reed, then that's like a barrier. And then there's like the fingerings, and then there's like what I'm doing with my air and with my lips. And so I actually think with the oboe that we have a lot of things that stop us along the way, and you kind of have to get over them. But at the same time with the oboe, it's interesting, like over time, composers knew we had to make reeds, and so the way the oboe repertoire works is that it's a lot more about what you can do with one note than with a lot of notes. I mean, the repertoire I played today, it's a lot of notes, and so that's really uncommon for the oboe. Normally, we're doing things where we're trying to like we're trying to like make a song happen with just a few little things here and there. And it wasn't until later in time that we started doing a lot more of these things, because composers knew we spend so much time working on these little things. And so that kind of also feels like a barrier. It's like, even the composers know that we've got a lot of stuff to do before we get there. And so, oboes are definitely very precise, but maybe that's not always a super good thing. It's like we can't just run to our instrument and make something happen. I mean, flute players, they don't have a reed. They just blow over a hole, and it's like blowing over a bottle or something, and you can do that, the kind of basic flute stuff. And so composers make them have to do the craziest stuff. They have to do the craziest stuff. And so, I don't know, that's how I think of it. Oboes are also, we are very uptight, because, I mean, I don't want to make a bad sound, but if I play like wrong, or in a way that isn't right with the reed, it's like, it's so easy to make the oboe sound bad. And so there are years spent early on when we're in band and we just sound awful. Whereas other instruments, all instruments are super hard, but it's like they can get something to happen easier. And so for oboes, we don't like to do things that are more adventurous. Whereas like nowadays, like right now in 2018, a lot of classical composers are writing crazy, wild stuff where you're purposely supposed to go like, oh, I can't do, like crazy things, or like, I just saw someone recently who bites her reed. Let me see if I can do it. And like play like really high notes. Oboes aren't as willing to do that kind of stuff because we spent so long unintentionally doing those things that it's like we don't want to go back to it. And so precise is one word, uptight is another, I think.
Sure. Yeah. And then one last question. You talked about, you write your own music. Yeah?
Sometimes, yeah.
And we didn't get to hear any of that tonight, unfortunately. But could you tell us a little bit about writing your own music? What's important to you in writing it? Do you follow this maybe narrative style that you're attracted to, or are you focused more on the sound?
It's something I've been thinking about recently, is that I write music very much so like an oboist would play music. And so telling a story is one thing, but it's more about like having like a really nice melody that you can latch onto. I mean, that example I just gave, that's a common thing that happens in classical composition right now. And I tend to I'm a little more conservative, just like oboe players tend to be a little bit more conservative with the way we write music, because I just want there to be something like really beautiful or like emotional to happen. I haven't written any oboe solos, so I couldn't have played anything today. But I'm attracted to composition because there are no barriers. It's like it's a page, and if you have a musical idea, you can just get it down. Whereas with the oboe, like I said, you've got the reed and you've got all these other things. And the oboe also, it's like the range of it is very short. Whereas like on a piano, you've got all those keys. Piano has 88 keys. We only have like 35, and some of them I don't even know the fingerings for. They're too high. So it's like I write music because I want to feel unlimited in that way, and also because some of the emotional things you can create that the oboe can do, it's more like you can do it on a larger scale with that.
Sure.
So I don't know, I've written things for orchestra. The Kent State Orchestra's played stuff I've done. I just literally yesterday and the day before, an opera I wrote premiered at the music building.
Wow,
which was
that's
like,
so exciting.
I know, it was
So
crazy.
exciting.
It was like a 2-year project.
Congratulations.
Thank you. That finally finished yesterday. It was so cool. It was 40 minutes of music for chamber group, including oboe. I wrote an oboe part because I know how to do that, but I did not play it because I didn't want to do that. And because the oboe part I wrote was hard, because I play it and I don't have mercy on people. But yeah, it was based on the short story by Kate Chopin called The Story of an Hour, which is like, if you haven't heard of it, I read it in high school. It's like super emotional. There's like all this drama that's happening really fast. And so that's why I was happy to work with that story. I didn't actually choose it. The person who wrote the words for the opera called a libretto. He chose it. But yeah, my music tends to be like that. Though right now I'm trying to get more into like, earlier we were talking about editing music software. I'm trying to get more into things that aren't as traditionally notated or just played by these instruments, but that's like a whole other world. And so I'm still getting into that. But yeah.
All right. Scott, anything else you want to add about your instrument? Or
I don't think so. This was a lot of fun. Thanks so much for having me.
It was so fun having you. Thanks so much. Scott Little on BSR Sessions. Awesome.